Evan Hale had traveled on many ships in his life, but none were as large or as crowded as the Starship Valtharos. It was a floating city in space, built by 12 powerful alien species who all believed their technology was the peak of perfection. To them, humans were still new, still developing, still learning how to stand among the old giants of the galaxy. That was why Evan was placed in the lowest passenger tier, given a narrow bunk, and signed in as a non-critical civilian. He did not complain. He never did. Humans had a strange habit of adapting easily, even when no one saw value in them. During the first 2 days, Evan remained quiet. He sat near the observation window, reading data on a small tablet, while the aliens walked past him with barely a glance. Some passengers towered over him, some floated, some shimmered with faint energy. They came from worlds with long histories and powerful empires. Whenever their eyes passed over him, they carried the same idea. An ordinary human. Nothing special. Evan did not mind. He had learned long ago that attention was not the same as respect. Some species acted polite but still believed humans were soft. Others thought humans lacked discipline. Some even whispered that humans were too emotional or too reckless. Evan simply smiled and continued reading. He knew who he was, and he understood that true strength did not need to shout. For most of the journey, he kept to himself. He explored the ship, admired the huge engines, and tried different alien foods from the dining hall. Sometimes, he offered to help the workers there. And although they did not think he was skilled, they appreciated the extra hands. Evan liked helping. It made him feel useful, even if no one else noticed. On the third day, small vibrations began traveling through the floor. The ship gave a low hum, almost like a warning whisper, but no one seemed too worried. Aliens with glowing eyes and armored skin confidently stated that everything was fine. Their certainty made the other passengers relax, but Evan felt something strange in his chest. It was a human instinct, an uneasy feeling, like the quiet before a storm. He sat near the railing of the main hall, watching alien specialists check scanning panels. They spoke fast in their languages, tapping glowing symbols. Evan understood none of it, but he could read body movements. They were stiff, uncertain. That meant the problem was real. Evan thought about stepping forward and offering help, but he reminded himself that humans were considered simple here. They would probably tell him to stay back or sit down, so he stayed silent, letting the engineers handle things. But he kept watching carefully. By evening, the hum in the ship deepened. The lights flickered once, just for a second, but every passenger felt it. A few aliens gasped. Some froze. Evan clenched his jaw. That flicker was not normal. An announcement echoed across the halls. Entering Nebula Sector 9. Please, stay calm. Evan raised his eyebrows. Sector 9 was famous in human travel warnings. A nebula filled with unstable energy waves and unpredictable gravity pockets. Even human ships avoided it, unless they had reinforced shields. Evan waited for the aliens to explain why they chose this sector, but no one did. The crew acted like it was nothing. Slowly, the ship drifted deeper into the nebula, and the view outside changed. Clouds of blue, red, and violet wrapped around the ship like slow-moving storms. Lightning-like streaks flashed far away. Beautiful, but dangerous. Evan walked back to his bunk area. Along the way, the lights flickered again, longer this time. A trembling pulse traveled through the floor, shaking the corridor. The alien passengers began whispering. Some looked confused, others alarmed. Then the ship shook violently. Evan grabbed the wall as a deep boom echoed through the corridors. The lights turned red. Alarms blared, loud and sharp. Doors sealed automatically. A cold voice repeated, "Power grid destabilized. Backup systems offline. Remain where you are." Around him, passengers panicked. Some shouted at the doors, some ran back and forth, unsure what to do. Evan took a slow breath. He had trained for emergencies back on Earth. Humans often prepared for the worst, because life taught them nothing stayed safe forever. He tightened his boots and moved through the chaos. "Everyone, stay calm," he said softly, trying to guide the frightened passengers away from the sealed doors. A few listened, but many ignored him, their fear louder than his calm voice. The ship trembled again. Sparks flew from the ceiling. A tall alien with crystal-like skin collapsed against a railing. Evan rushed to help, checking for injuries. The alien stared at him, confused that a human would approach with such confidence. Evan offered a reassuring smile and guided him to a safer corner. "Why is this happening?" the alien asked. "I don't know yet," Evan replied. "But panicking won't help us." The alien blinked, surprised by the steady tone. After making sure more passengers were okay, Evan decided he could not just wait. He moved toward the upper deck where the control room was located. Several metal blast doors blocked his path, so he looked for alternative routes. Humans were experts at improvising. He climbed into a maintenance hatch, pulling himself up using pipes and handrails. Inside the narrow tunnel, the air felt warm. Electrical currents flickered along the walls. Evan crawled forward, using his human sense of balance to stay steady during the ship's constant shaking. He reached a metal grate that overlooked the control deck below. Chaos filled the room. Alien officers shouted at one another. Screens flashed error messages, and the main engineer, a tall, four-armed species, looked overwhelmed. Evan pushed the grate open and dropped into the room. The officers stared at him with shock. "This area is restricted," one snapped. "Humans are not authorized here." Evan lifted his hands calmly. "I know. But your ship is losing power from an overload loop. If you don't reroute it now, the engines will shut down completely." The officers paused. Their expressions shifted from irritation to uncertainty. "How do you know that?" one demanded. Evan pointed to a glowing console. "The red pulses running through that line? That means the current is feeding back into itself, building pressure. I've seen it before. You need to close the manual relay." The aliens exchanged confused looks. Their systems were built to automate everything. Manual relays were considered outdated. They almost never used them. Another tremor hit. The ship lurched to one side. A panel burst, spraying sparks. The captain shouted, "Someone fix the overload. We're drifting into a gravity current." Evan stepped forward. "Let me help." The captain hesitated. He had heard older officers talk about humans. They were seen as adaptable, unpredictable, sometimes clever in ways that confused other species. Finally, he gave a slow nod. "Fine. Show us." Evan ran to the wall panel, pulled out his pocket tools, simple metal tools humans always carried, and began adjusting wires. The aliens watched with wide eyes. To them, such physical methods looked primitive, but Evan's hands were steady, precise. He knew exactly where the pressure point was. With a quick spark and a sharp click, the overload loop stopped. The lights flickered from red to orange. The alarm softened. Screens stabilized. The crew stared at him in silent shock. Evan stepped back and wiped dust from his hands. "You'll get limited power back soon," he said. "But the main systems are still unstable. You need to reinforce the grid." "You fixed it," one alien whispered. "Humans improvise," Evan replied simply. "It's how we survive." Before anyone could thank him, another warning rang out, deeper, louder, frightening. A new voice came over the speakers. "Energy wave approaching. Shields unresponsive. Prepare for impact." Evan's heart tightened. This was far from over. He looked at the captain. "Let me help again." The captain, now seeing him differently, not as a background passenger, but as someone steady in danger, gave a firm nod. Evan squared his shoulders. Humans were often overlooked, but that never stopped them from stepping forward when it mattered. The moment the warning echoed through the starship, every alien officer froze. The lights dimmed again as the ship drifted deeper into the twisting colors of the nebula. Evan stood in the middle of the control deck, watching the readings flash across the screens. He had never seen a cosmic energy wave from up close before, but the sharp rising values told him enough. Something powerful was approaching fast. Alien specialists rushed to their stations, tapping glowing buttons, trying everything they could to restart the shields. Sparks flew out of one of the consoles, and 2 officers stumbled back in fear. The captain slammed his fist on the armrest, trying to keep control over the chaotic atmosphere. The deck shook violently. It felt like the starship itself was begging for help. Evan knew panic was their greatest enemy right now. He took a slow breath and spoke to the captain. "Your shield system keeps trying to start automatically. You need to override the auto cycle." The captain stared at him. "Why would we do that?" "Automation is designed for maximum efficiency." Not in a nebula like this," Evan replied calmly. "The energy waves confuse automated sensors. You need manual control." The captain hesitated again. It was clear his training did not include situations where a human passenger offered better advice than the ship's own systems. But the readings kept rising. The wave would hit in less than a minute. Finally, he nodded. "Do it." Evan went to the side console and opened a panel underneath. A burst of warm air hit his face. The circuits glowed in swirling colors, reacting to the unstable nebula energy. He traced a single cable with his fingers, finding the point where the ship's automated core blocked manual inputs. He unplugged 2 connectors and reattached them in reverse order. The console hissed, flickering from red to bright blue. "That should give you control," Evan said. The shield officer rushed forward, tapping controls again. This time, the panel responded. A low thrum shook the ship as weak shields formed around the hull, but it was too late to stabilize fully before the wave arrived. A violent flash filled the view outside, bright enough to be seen even through the nebula's thick clouds. The entire ship rocked like a small boat, thrown by a massive ocean. The floor tilted sharply. Officers grabbed whatever they could to avoid falling. Evan stumbled, but quickly regained his balance by grabbing the railing. A deafening roar echoed through the walls as the energy wave slammed into the ship. The shields held for a moment, then screamed in protest, the sound vibrating through the metal like cracking ice. The ship drifted several degrees off course. Pulled by the force of the wave, Evan felt his stomach twist from the sudden movement. A loud explosion sounded from the lower decks. The control room lights flickered wildly. "Section 7 is collapsing," someone shouted. "Structural damage detected. We are losing passengers trapped inside." Evan's eyes widened. "We need to get to that section." The captain tightened his jaw. "We can't send my officers. The structure is too unstable. It may collapse completely." Evan shook his head. "If we don't try, people will die." The captain looked torn. He respected life. Every species on the ship believed in protecting civilians. Losing even one life would weigh heavily on him, but he also had orders not to risk his officers unless absolutely necessary. So Evan stepped forward. "I'll go." The entire room went silent. The shield officer blinked in confusion. "A human? Alone? That area is dangerous." Evan didn't flinch. "Humans handle tight spaces well. We move fast, and we're good at not giving up." The captain stared at him. He wanted to say no. He wanted to protect this strange human who somehow kept helping them again and again. But they had no other volunteers. No other options. Finally, he gave a slow nod. "I will assign 2 drones to guide you, but you must hurry." Evan replied with a firm, steady voice. "I will." He left the control deck immediately, running through the corridors that still shook from aftershocks. Emergency lights flashed red. Smoke drifted from damaged panels. The ship groaned under the pressure of the nebula. Every sound told Evan the same thing. The Valtharos was struggling to stay alive. He reached the lift tube and jumped inside. The system was partially damaged, so the lift moved with jerky motions, groaning all the way down. When it stopped, the doors opened to a corridor filled with dust and debris. 2 small flying drones hovered near him, lighting the path with soft blue lights. "Show me the safest route," Evan said. They beeped softly and moved ahead. Evan followed them through a hallway that had cracked open in several places. Pipes leaked steam, and sparks rained down from damaged electrical lines. The floor trembled under his feet. Somewhere deeper inside the ship, metal groaned loudly, warning of further collapse. When Evan reached Section 7, the destruction was severe. A massive support beam had fallen, blocking part of the path. Walls were bent inward, crushed by the impact. Fires flickered in broken panels, and the smell of burned metal filled the air. Evan squeezed through a narrow gap, his body brushing against jagged edges. A normal alien officer, tall, bulky, heavily armored, would never fit through here. This was the kind of path only a human could navigate. Evan pushed deeper inside, using his arms to brace himself against debris while keeping balance. He soon heard faint cries. They were soft, frightened, echoing from deeper inside the collapsed area. Evan quickly followed the sound. A small group of aliens, 3 adults and 2 younglings, were trapped behind another fallen beam. One of the adults, a creature with delicate feather-like skin, looked badly injured, their wings pinned under debris. When the aliens saw Evan crawling toward them, their eyes widened in disbelief. A human?" one stammered. Evan gave them a calm look. "I'm here to help," the injured alien gasped, trembling in pain. Evan crouched beside them, checking carefully. The beam was too heavy for them to move. But maybe not for him. Humans were not the strongest species in the galaxy, but they were stubborn. They could push their bodies far beyond normal limits when someone needed help. Evan planted his feet, slid both hands under the metal beam, and began lifting. At first, it didn't even budge. The beam must have weighed several hundred kilograms. But Evan didn't stop. He tightened every muscle, pushing through the pain, forcing the beam up inch by inch. His arms shook violently. Sweat dripped down his forehead. One of the younglings whispered, "He's going to break." But Evan didn't. He gritted his teeth, lifted with everything he had, and finally pushed the beam high enough for the injured alien to slide out. The moment they were free, Evan let the beam drop with a loud crash. He leaned forward, breathing hard, but he quickly stood straight again. "Can you walk?" he asked the injured alien. "I think so," they replied weakly. "Good. Stay close." He guided the aliens back toward the passage, but the ship shook again, harder this time. The floor tilted sharply, causing Evan to stumble and press his hand against the wall to regain balance. A new crack appeared in the ceiling. Dust rained down. "Move fast," Evan shouted. The group hurried behind him. Evan guided them to the narrow gap he had crawled through earlier. But another collapse blocked it completely now. The aliens panicked. Evan stared at the new blockage, thinking fast. Humans excelled at this, making quick decisions under pressure. He spotted a service duct barely half a meter tall, running along the upper wall. It was small, cramped, dangerous, and the only path left. "We go through there," Evan said. The aliens stared at him in shock. "We won't fit." "You will. I'll help you." He lifted one of the smaller aliens up first, guiding them into the duct. They crawled inside with trembling hands. Evan helped the others one by one, pushing them gently forward. When all 5 were inside, Evan took a deep breath and pulled himself up into the duct last. It was tight. The metal scraped his arms and shoulders, but he kept moving. The duct led them upward, then angled sharply to the left. Evan moved behind the group, encouraging them whenever they slowed. He could hear their frightened breaths echo through the narrow space. Finally, they reached a ventilation panel. Evan pushed it open with his shoulder and climbed out, helping the aliens down one by one. When they reached the safer part of the ship, medical drones rushed toward them. The aliens were quickly taken for treatment. 2 of them looked back at Evan with disbelief and gratitude. "You saved us," one whispered. Evan smiled softly. "You're safe now. That's what matters." But the moment he turned to walk back toward the control deck, the ship trembled violently again. This time, the lights turned yellow. The floor vibrated harder than before. Evan's expression tightened. Whatever was happening next would be even worse. And the Starship would need more than temporary fixes. It would need him again. Evan hurried back through the damaged corridor. feeling the starship tremble around him like a wounded giant struggling to stand. The ship groaned from deep within its metallic ribs, and every vibration told him that things were getting worse. The nebula outside wasn't calming, it was growing more unstable, its strange energy pushing the ship towards something dangerous. Evan didn't know exactly what it was, but the tight feeling in his chest warned him that the real crisis was only beginning. When he reached the lift tube, he found it shaking violently as it moved. The lights inside flickered, and sparks fell from the ceiling. Evan stepped in anyway. Time was more important than safety. The lift rattled upward, rising slowly with loud grinding sounds. He kept his hand on the wall to stay balanced. As the doors opened to the control deck, he heard shouting even before he stepped out. Alien officers were moving back and forth in panic. Screens glowed red. Warning symbols filled the main display. The captain stood at the center of the chaos, holding onto the railing as the ship rocked from side to side. When he saw Evan approaching, his expression shifted, part shock, part relief. "You survived," the captain said. His voice carried both worry and respect. Evan nodded. "The trapped passengers are safe, but the damage in Section 7 is serious." "We know," the captain replied grimly. "And now we have a bigger problem." Evan approached the large central screen. It displayed a three-dimensional map of the nebula. The ship was drifting toward a swirling vortex of bright energy like a storm inside a storm. The pull was unmistakable. "What is that?" Evan asked quietly. "It's a gravitational funnel," the shield officer said. "It forms when nebula waves collide. If we fall into it, our hull will be crushed." Evan inhaled sharply. "How long do we have?" "How long do we have?" 10 minutes, the captain said. Evan understood what that meant. The engines were offline. The power grid was weak. The shields were barely holding together. Everything needed fixing. At the same time, he looked around the room. Aliens stood at their stations. Afraid. They were skilled, trained, intelligent. But none of them were prepared for this. They relied too much on perfect systems, perfect conditions, perfect machines. But space wasn't perfect. Emergencies weren't perfect. Survival wasn't perfect. Humans, however, were good at imperfect things. Evan pointed toward the engine readings. "Your engines aren't damaged. They're stuck in automatic safety mode. They shut down because they detected unstable energy." The engineering officer shook his head. "We already tried overriding the safeties." "You tried through the system," Evan replied. "But you didn't try physically." Several aliens stared at him, confused. Evan continued. "On human ships, when software fails, people switch to hardware. You have manual ignition coils built into the engine room, right?" The engineering officer blinked. "Yes, but only for emergencies." "This is an emergency," Evan said. "You need to start them manually. That means going into the engine compartment and activating them by hand." The room went silent. The engine compartment was located at the very bottom of the ship, where the nebula's energy interference was strongest. Radiation readings were climbing. The area shook from every wave. The captain hesitated. "It's too dangerous. We can't send anyone there." Evan's voice was steady. "Send me." The officers murmured in disbelief. The captain frowned deeply. "Human, you've already risked your life once. And now you want to enter the engine core?" "Even we don't go there," Evan replied simply. "You need the engines, and I'm the only one who keeps calm under pressure." The captain stared at him for a long moment. Evan didn't look away. He had already decided. Humans had always faced impossible odds, storms, wars, disasters, and yet they survived by trying anyway. Evan wasn't fearless, but he wasn't the type to run when others were in danger. Finally, the captain gave a slow nod. "Very well, but I will send a drone with you." Evan smiled softly. "One drone is enough." He left the control deck and headed toward the lower levels again. The drone followed closely, lighting the path with a soft blue glow. The corridor floors shook so hard that Evan had to walk with his feet wide apart to keep balance. As he reached the engine access hallway, the temperature rose sharply. The walls were warm. Lights flickered madly. A deep humming filled the air, like the growl of a giant machine in pain. The drone scanned the door. Radiation levels rising. It beeped. Evan nodded. "Just guide me. Don't fall behind." The heavy door slid open with a jarring screech. Inside, the engine room looked like a battlefield. Panels had burst open. Pipes rattled. Electrical sparks shot across the air. The huge main engine core glowed with a faint purple light, pulsing like a heartbeat out of rhythm. Evan stepped inside. Heat wrapped around him like a blanket. His skin prickled. He took a deep breath and looked around, searching for the manual ignition coils. The drone pointed to a vertical metal unit on the far side of the room, half covered in smoke. Evan rushed toward it. As he moved, another tremor shook the ship. A massive pipe above him snapped from its mount, swinging downward. The drone beeped a warning. Evan ducked just in time, feeling the pipe scrape above his back. A shower of sparks rained over him. He didn't slow down. When he reached the ignition unit, he pulled off the protective panel and saw a series of metallic levers. Each one needed to be pulled down in a precise sequence. He understood the pattern. Humans were good at recognizing simple mechanics. He grabbed the first lever and pulled it down. It resisted at first, stiff from lack of use, then snapped into place with a loud clunk. The engine core rumbled. He moved to the second lever. More resistance, more heat. His arms shook from the effort, but he pushed through. Halfway through activating the third lever, the floor jerked violently. Evan lost his footing and slammed into the metal unit, wincing in pain. The drone beeped urgently, warning of increased instability, but he didn't stop. He pushed the third lever until it locked into place. The engine core responded with a sharp increase in power. The purple glow brightened. The vibrations shifted from chaotic shaking to a steadier pattern. Evan felt hope surge through him. He reached for the fourth lever, but then a new alarm blared overhead. Energy wave approaching. Impact in 30 seconds. Evan's heart pounded. He knew the engines had to restart before the wave hit. If not, the gravitational funnel would pull the ship in even faster. And no amount of shields or bravery would save them. He grabbed the fourth lever with both hands and pulled. His muscles burned. The metal was hot. Almost too hot to touch. But he held on tightly. His teeth clenched. His eyes narrowed with determination. The lever finally clicked into place. The engine core roared to life. Bright light filled the room, and the floor beneath Evan vibrated with renewed power. The ship was awakening again. The engines were breathing. The drone beeped happily. Ignition successful. Evan allowed himself one deep breath of relief. Then he turned to leave, but the room shook harder than ever before. A burst of energy from the nebula slammed into the ship, causing a section of the ceiling to collapse near the doorway. Metal chunks fell, blocking the exit. Evan rushed toward the pile, pushing at the debris with all his strength. Some pieces moved. Others did not. Time was running out. The energy wave was seconds away. He stepped back and scanned the room. There had to be another way out. His human instincts searched fast, skipping from idea to idea like a spark jumping across wires. Then he saw it. A narrow emergency shaft along the far wall, half hidden behind a stack of pipes. It was barely wide enough for a human body. Perfect. He ran toward it, brushed away the dust, and kicked the hatch open. The shaft stretched upward like a dark tunnel. Evan climbed inside, gripping the metal rungs, pulling himself up as fast as he could. The drone followed, squeezing through behind him. Halfway up, the energy wave hit. The force shook the entire shaft. Evan clung to the rungs with all his strength as the shaking tried to rip him loose. His muscles screamed in protest. Metal vibrated under his hands like a living creature. The drone's lights flickered wildly behind him. But Evan didn't let go. Humans held on. That was their greatest talent. After several agonizing seconds, the shaking slowed. The wave passed. Evan continued climbing until he reached the upper hatch. He shoved it open and crawled out, breathing hard, sweat dripping down his face. He stood up slowly. The ship was still shaking, but not as violently. The engines were humming steadily, fighting against the gravitational pull. Evan looked around. He had survived again, but he knew the crisis wasn't over. The engines were running, but the ship's path needed correction. The nebula was still dangerous, and the aliens confused, frightened, overwhelmed, needed guidance. Evan began walking back toward the control deck. He wasn't just a passenger anymore. He was their hope, and the next few minutes would decide whether the Valtharos lived or died. Evan made his way through the trembling corridor, breathing heavily but walking with determination. His clothes were torn, his arms bruised, and there was soot on his face from the engine room. But none of that mattered now. The engines were alive, and the Valtharos had a chance. He only hoped it wasn't too late. As he moved, the floor shook again. But this time the shaking wasn't as wild or chaotic. It felt different, like the ship was fighting back instead of surrendering to the nebula's force. The lights flickered from red to yellow, showing slight improvement. The air around him, while still thick with smoke, felt less panicked than before. The drone that had followed him hovered beside him, its light flickering with small, excited pulses. Engine output stable. It beeped. Course correction required. I know, Evan whispered. We're almost there. He reached the lift, stepped inside, and held onto the rail as it ascended with loud groans. The hum of the engines vibrated up the walls of the shaft. And for the first time since the crisis began, the vibration felt strong, not desperate. The doors opened to the control deck, revealing a scene that had changed dramatically since he last left. The officers were still tense, but they were no longer shouting. Instead, they were focused, working quickly, speaking clearly. The captain stood tall at the center, giving orders with renewed confidence. When the aliens saw Evan, they froze for a moment. Their eyes widened. Some gasped softly. Others whispered in disbelief. They looked at him not as a background passenger, but as someone who had walked through fire. The captain stepped forward with urgency. "Human Evan," he said. "The engines are responding, but the gravitational funnel is still pulling us in. We need to realign the ship immediately." Evan walked up to the central display. The map showed the ship drifting toward the vortex, a swirling storm of blue and white energy twisting like a giant whirlpool in space. It was beautiful and terrifying. "What do you need?" Evan asked. "We need the thrusters to fire at exact angles," the shield officer said. "But the auto-navigation is malfunctioning." Evan gave a faint smile. "Then control them manually." The officer blinked. "No one has ever flown a ship this size by hand." "Good," Evan said calmly. "That means no one has failed at it either." The captain stared at him, realizing the meaning behind his words. Humans had a strange way of turning impossibility into a challenge rather than a dead end. They always tried. They always reached. And sometimes, they succeeded simply because they refused to stop. The captain gestured to the navigation platform. "Take control." Evan nodded and stepped forward. The navigation platform was huge, built for tall alien officers with elongated arms and multi-jointed fingers. But the controls responded to touch, and Evan understood enough to operate them. He gripped the manual sliders and force sticks, feeling the vibration of the engines through the console. The thrusters were active, just waiting for commands. The ship shook again as the gravitational funnel pulled harder, stretching the hull with invisible force. Alarms beeped. A few officers clutched their stations. Evan took a deep breath, his face steady. "Hold on." Then he pushed the left thruster stick forward. The ship lurched to the right. The gravitational pull shifted. The vortex moved from directly ahead to slightly off-center. The reaction wasn't perfect, but it bought them a few seconds. The captain watched him with wide eyes. Again, Evan pulled the opposite slider and tilted another stick. The right thrusters fired next, pushing the ship sideways. The gravitational pull screamed through the metal, making the whole deck vibrate. "Angle the nose down," an officer shouted. Evan did exactly that, pushing the front control stick downward. The Starship dipped, shifting its trajectory further away from the funnel's center. The vortex roared outside the view window, Colors spiraled in impossible patterns, weaving and clashing like living storms. The gravitational pull was so strong that even Evan felt pressure in his chest. His heartbeat grew heavy. Sweat trickled down his forehead, but he didn't let go. He adjusted the controls again, firing thrusters at a slight diagonal. The ship responded slower than expected. The engines groaned. The hull creaked. One officer yelled, "The pull is too strong." The captain shouted back, "Trust him." Evan leaned into the platform, watching every piece of data, reading every vibration through the controls as if they were living signals. He had flown many ships in simulations. He had repaired engines. But he had never tried steering a massive alien starship through a gravitational storm. Yet he moved with calm confidence. He made another adjustment, small but precise. The ship twisted slightly, its nose turning away from the vortex. The magnetic field outside clashed with the shields, creating sparks of energy visible through the windows. Then a loud warning echoed through the deck. Secondary wave approaching. Evan looked sharply at the captain. "How strong?" "Stronger than the first," the captain said. "Much stronger." Evan swallowed, but his voice remained steady. "Then we outrun it." "We can't," an officer argued. "The engines are barely holding." "We don't need to outrun it," Evan said. "We need to break free of the funnel before it hits. After that, the wave won't crush us." The captain nodded slowly. "Do it." Evan tightened his grip and fired all forward thrusters. The engines roared, shaking the entire ship. The hull vibrated so violently that some officers fell to their knees. The lights dimmed, then flared bright again. The starship strained, pushing against the invisible pull like a creature stuck in quicksand. The engines screamed, panels rattled. A few sparks burst from overhead cables. Evan's arms trembled. His vision blurred for a moment. But he kept going. "Come on," he whispered through clenched teeth. "Move." The gravitational pull resisted, gripping the ship like a giant hand refusing to let go. Evan fired side thrusters again, forcing the ship to twist at a dangerous angle. An alarm shrieked. A pipe burst near the back of the deck. Officers flinched, and then the pull loosened, just a little but enough. The ship surged forward, breaking through the edge of the vortex. The stars beyond the nebula grew clearer. The swirling energy behind them shrieked like a storm losing its prey. But the crisis wasn't over yet. The secondary energy wave struck. It hit the shields like a hammer, sending a shock through the entire ship. Evan felt the platform shake so hard, he almost lost his grip. The engines flickered, then steadied. Lights flashed bright white as the shields absorbed the wave. The sound was deafening like roaring thunder tearing through metal. But the ship held, the shields held, and when the wave faded, the ship drifted into calmer space. The nebula's violent colors softened into gentle blue clouds. The gravitational storm disappeared behind them. They were safe. The control deck fell into stunned silence. No alarms. No shaking. No chaos. Only the deep, steady hum of engines and the quiet breathing of everyone present. Evan stepped back from the console. His legs shook. Sweat soaked his shirt. His hands trembled from exhaustion. But he was smiling. The captain moved toward him slowly, almost cautiously, as if approaching something rare and powerful. "Evan Hale," the captain said, his voice heavy with emotion. "You saved us. All of us." Evan shook his head. "We saved each other." The captain stared at him. "No. You led us. You saw solutions where we saw failures. You stepped forward when everyone else stepped back. You risked your life again and again. Your strength, your mind, your spirit. It is not something we expected from a human." Evan chuckled softly. "Humans do their best work when no one expects anything." A quiet laugh rippled across the room. Officers smiled, some for the first time since the crisis began. A few even bowed slightly toward him, a gesture of deep respect in many alien cultures. As they guided the ship toward safe space, aliens from all over the vessel gathered near the entrance of the control deck. They stared at Evan with awe, gratitude, and a sense of amazement. Some younglings waved at him with shy admiration. Even the injured passengers he had rescued earlier sent messages of thanks. Evan didn't know what to say. He wasn't used to being the center of attention. The captain placed a hand on his shoulder. From this day forward, humans will no longer be overlooked on this ship or anywhere in our alliance. You have shown us what your people can do. Evan looked around at the faces filled with hope. I just did what anyone should do. Perhaps, the captain said softly. But you did it when it mattered most. The ship continued sailing through calmer space, leaving the dangerous nebula far behind. Life slowly returned to normal. Repairs began. Crew members exchanged stories about the human who saved them. Evan returned to his small bunk, finally able to rest. He lay down, staring at the soft ceiling lights, feeling exhaustion slowly wash over him. But beneath that exhaustion, there was pride, not loud, not boastful, but warm and steady. He had come aboard as an overlooked passenger, but he was leaving as something else entirely, a symbol of humanity's hidden strength. And somewhere deep inside the starship Valtharos, aliens whispered a new truth across their halls. Humans may look small, but when everything else fails, humans rise.